The temperature hit -30, but the sheriff's deputy leaned down and whispered, "Mrs. Miller, those plastic tubs you've got out back, they're officially the most valuable thing in this county now." Across the road, the generator noise stuttered and died, plunging the entire valley into an echoing silence. The deputy didn't wait for a response, adjusting the wool scarf covering his face. "It's worse than they said, ma'am. The pipes froze 3 towns over. We need to know who you've got inside that glorified greenhouse and how long the insulation will hold." The winter garden, mocked for years as a crazy hobby, was suddenly the only thing standing between them, and 0 calories. Owen sat at the kitchen table, the silence of the house amplified by the dead quiet outside. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the deep cycle battery bank hidden in the crawl space, a comfortingly mechanical sound that affirmed control in a world that had none. His coffee cup was thick ceramic, warmed in his large, calloused hands, but he wasn't drinking. He was watching the ice sheet bloom across the corner of the double-pane window, a delicate, fractal pattern of impending siege. Owen was a man built like a dock worker, broad-shouldered and heavy, but his movements were precise, quiet. He hadn't spoken more than 10 words to Mrs. Miller since she rented him the small, detached workshop behind her property 6 months ago. He paid on time, always in cash, and kept entirely to himself. The only sign of his past was the way he checked the locks 3 times before bed, and the small, tarnished silver compass he kept beside his bed, a compass that was always pointing slightly north, regardless of where he set it down. He surveyed the interior of the house. It was a rental, clean, minimal, functional. He owned little that mattered, nothing that couldn't be packed into the battered army green duffel bag currently leaning against the wall. That duffel bag had been his only permanent address for 7 years. Stability felt temporary to Owen, a dangerous illusion that the world would inevitably rip away. He'd learned early to keep his footprint light and his expectations lower. The small, wood-burning stove glowed cherry red in the corner, keeping the temperature tolerable. He added a single, perfectly seasoned log, watching the sparks climb before settling the latch. He avoided looking toward the main house where Mrs. Miller lived. He knew she had a granddaughter living with her now, a little girl whose laughter sometimes managed to pierce the thick insulation of Owen's focus. He didn't dislike the sound, but he treated it like a potential hazard, something bright and fragile that he was entirely unqualified to touch. He preferred the quiet, the reliable isolation. It was safe. The extreme cold outside was merely a physical manifestation of the cold he carried. He was accustomed to weathering storms alone. He rose, not restless, but moving with the contained energy of someone perpetually ready to leave. He checked the fuel gauge on the auxiliary tank he kept hidden under the tarp, ensuring their remaining independence. Eleanor Miller was not built for extremes. She was 53, tired from a lifetime of being quietly necessary, and currently wrestling a tarp over the small entry porch to reduce heat loss. Her knuckles were red and stiff, and a stray lock of greying hair kept escaping her woolen hat. She didn't complain. Complaining didn't save fuel or generate heat. She moved with an efficiency born of necessity, not drama. Her granddaughter, 8-year-old Lily, sat on the indoor step, watching Eleanor struggle with the frozen, tie-down rope. Lily wasn't demanding or whiny, she simply observed. Lily had come to live with Eleanor after her parents lost their life in an accident 6 months prior. The same month, Owen rented the workshop. Lily carried her grief quietly, translating the instability of her world into a hyper-awareness of detail. "Grandma, the plastic cracked a little," Lily stated plainly, pointing to a stressed seam on the temporary windbreak they had rigged. Eleanor followed her gaze. "It's okay, sweetie. It's just stress. Can you hold this side while I loop the knot?" Lily pushed herself up instantly, small hands gripping the icy plastic without hesitation. She didn't ask, why? They had to be so careful. She just absorbed the fact that they did. Her sincerity was absolute. Inside the house, the atmosphere was slightly damp, but smelled faintly of rosemary and soil, the pervasive, earthy scent from the hidden winter garden. The garden, built into the insulated back extension, was Eleanor's insurance policy against high grocery prices and bad winters. Now, it was their lifeline. Eleanor finished securing the tarp and came inside, stripping off her gloves. She didn't immediately rush to the warmth. Instead, she knelt by the pantry door and checked the seals, pressing the weather stripping to ensure a perfect barrier. Her kindness wasn't soft. It was functional. She cooked with every bit of leftover scrap, mended every worn piece of clothing, and never raised her voice. Her whole existence was a testimony to practical resilience. Lily suddenly looked past Eleanor toward the frosted window facing the workshop. "Why does Mr. Owen never use the front door?" Eleanor wiped her hands on her jeans. "He likes his privacy, honey. And he helps us with the heavy lifting, remember? He fixed that roof leak." She was explaining behavior, not excusing it. She respected Owen's distance, understanding that sometimes silence was a form of self-preservation. She never pried. She turned to a small shelf where a jar of homemade strawberry jam sat. She uncapped it, spooned a small amount onto a cracker, and handed it to Lily. It was a small, unnecessary luxury in the growing crisis, a moment of normalcy she deliberately created. "Before we continue with this unexpected partnership, tell me, where are you watching this story unfold? Drop a comment below." The critical infrastructure failure, the power grid shutdown, had been predicted for days, but the sheer speed of the deep freeze caught everyone off guard. They were on day 3 of total isolation. Owen's workshop was holding temperature well, a testament to his obsessive insulation work. But the water line from the main house was completely frozen solid. He needed to melt snow, an inefficient and endless task. That evening, Eleanor appeared at his workshop door, bundled against the cold, carrying 2 steaming mugs. She didn't knock. She simply opened the door 2 inches, waited for his nod, and slipped inside, radiating controlled warmth. "It's herbal tea, with honey. Better than the stale coffee you're drinking," she said, placing 1 mug on his workbench beside his blueprints for a passive solar collector. She didn't comment on the blueprints or the high-tech equipment he possessed. Owen looked up from cleaning the soot filter on his portable heater. He hadn't seen her approach. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller." "Eleanor," she corrected, not sternly, just factually. "We're neighbors, Owen, and we're down to 2 functional water pipes, mine and the one running to the garden's filtration system. You need water, and I need muscle to carry fuel from the shed before the ice makes it impossible." It was a transaction, clear and simple, stripped of sentimentality. Owen understood transactions. "Deal," he said, taking the mug. The warmth spread instantly through his chilled fingers. "Good. Lily is running a fever, a mild one, from the drafty front door. I need to keep the humidity up near her. You can collect water directly from the garden's grey water reserve tomorrow morning. It's purified, just needs boiling." She offered him a solution, an invitation into their inner circle, the tiny, self-sustaining bubble of the winter garden. It wasn't just a physical space, it was a sanctuary of their small, combined future. Owen hesitated, his gaze drifting over her shoulder. The main house felt distant, yet suddenly close. "I can fix the front door draft tonight." Eleanor smiled, a faint, tired expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know you can, Owen. But first drink your tea. It's too cold to rush." She didn't stay. She didn't linger for small talk. She simply presented a need, offered a solution, and provided a moment of warmth. As she closed the door, Owen found himself staring at the complex wiring of his circuit board, feeling the odd, quiet weight of shared dependency. The isolation was beginning to crack. Owen finished his tea and started gathering his tools to address the draft in Eleanor's porch frame. The silver compass lay on his workbench, catching the weak electric light. He picked it up, feeling the familiar cold weight of the metal. It wasn't a navigational tool, it was a cheap souvenir given to him decades ago. He was 6 years old, standing on a curb in a city he couldn't name, clutching a slightly larger version of this compass. His father, a man whose face was already blurring in his memory, had given it to him. "This will always point you to where you need to be, son," the father had said, right before walking around the corner and simply dissolving into the traffic. Owen had waited for 3 hours, the metal growing colder in his small hand, the street noise indifferent to his presence. He wasn't crying, he was just watching the needle swing wildly, realizing that what he needed wasn't a direction, but a constant. The police found him eventually, and the compass was lost somewhere in the system. Years later, he bought the small replica, not for sentimentality, but as a perpetual reminder that constant, reliable direction was a self-generated quality, never a gift. He shoved the compass into his jacket pocket. The memory wasn't a sudden, dramatic flashback, but a dull, chronic ache, like scar tissue pulling tight in the cold. Abandonment hadn't taught him bitterness, it had taught him self-sufficiency to a fault. Now, as he walked toward the main house, carrying a coil of heavy sealant and a hammer, he saw Lily through the living room window. She wasn't playing, she was sitting on the floor, sorting through a pile of salvaged winter blankets with Eleanor. Lily was folding them with meticulous, tiny movements, mimicking her grandmother's quiet concentration. She was helping, not because she was asked, but because she saw a need and filled it. Owen stopped for a moment, the cold wind whipping the snow against his face. That kind of shared work, that inherent belonging, was a universe away from the curb where he'd learned his first lesson about being alone. He saw in Lily the reflection of a child clinging to structure, clinging to a dependable adult. He realized with a sudden, unpleasant clarity that he was part of that structure now. He was the heavy lifter, the fixer, the reliable component. He needed to be precisely where he was. He gripped the hammer tighter and headed for the porch, focusing on the simple, practical geometry of sealing a gap. The days blurred into a pattern of survival. The deep freeze continued, the power grid remained dead, and the world outside their property was silent under a blanket of unyielding ice. Inside Eleanor's world, a small, vibrant rhythm was taking hold. Owen spent his mornings in the main house, not just fixing things, but maintaining systems. He recalibrated the gravity-fed water drip for the hydroponic shelves in the winter garden, ensuring every drop was accounted for. Eleanor would be nearby, harvesting lettuce or tending the low-light herbs, always with a question about efficiency, never about his past. "The air pressure seems low on the main pump regulator, Owen," she might say, holding a small tool he'd left behind. "Do you need me to adjust this dial 3 clicks clockwise?" He would confirm, appreciating her precision and her lack of fuss. She didn't treat him as a handyman. She treated him as a co-engineer of their survival. Lily, meanwhile, had seamlessly integrated Owen into her orbit. She didn't seek his attention. She simply existed near him. When Owen worked on the small auxiliary radio transmitter, Lily would sit quietly, drawing pictures of vegetables and complicated piping systems. She never asked him about the outside world. One afternoon, Owen was hauling a heavy bag of dried compost mix into the heated extension. The task was brutal in the confined space. Lily suddenly appeared and pressed a small, slightly squashed oat bar into his hand. "Grandma said you need calories when you lift heavy," she whispered, her eyes serious. "I save mine." Owen paused, looking down at the small gesture. It was an offering of shared scarcity. He hadn't received a pure gift, a kindness without expectation or demand, in years. He accepted it, managing only a short, gruff, "Thanks, kid." He began eating his meals at Eleanor's small kitchen table. It wasn't a formal invitation, but an unspoken agreement. Eating in his drafty workshop consumed unnecessary fuel. Eleanor would serve simple, nutritious food: rice, dried beans, greens from the garden. They ate mostly in silence. One evening, Eleanor was stitching a tear in Owen's heavy coat. She noticed the slight irregularity of his breathing as he watched the snow fall outside. "You haven't been this still since the first night," she observed, her needle flashing under the lamplight. Owen shrugged. "It's quieter here." "The quiet inside is better than the quiet outside," she agreed, threading the needle with practiced ease. He realized the quiet wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of threat. He wasn't hiding here, he was staying. He felt the rigid scaffolding of his self-imposed isolation beginning to soften, replaced by the warm, necessary weight of shared responsibility. He was rooted for the first time in years. The break came during a routine check of the buried fuel tanks. The cold had finally breached the outer defense system of the garden. A small but crucial heater fan suddenly seized up. The temperature drop inside the extension was minor, but immediate panic flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Owen was already diagnosing the electrical failure. He needed a specific micro-relay, one he knew he had in his workshop's inventory. He sprinted back across the icy yard, the adrenaline making him careless. When he returned, Eleanor was staring at a small ceramic pot on the floor. It had contained the last batch of high-protein sprouting seeds, vital for sustained nutrition. In his haste, Owen had knocked it off the narrow shelf, and the clay pot had shattered, scattering the precious seeds across the damp concrete floor. Lily was standing beside the mess, her face pale, silent tears running down her cheeks. She was not crying from a scrape or a minor fright. She was witnessing the loss of their future food. Eleanor didn't yell. Her voice was thin, sharpened by the stress of 7 days under siege. "Owen, what were you thinking? Look at this. Those were 3 weeks of sprouts. We sorted them for 2 hours yesterday." "I was going for the relay," Owen stated, pointing to the fan. "The temperature will drop below freezing in there in an hour. The fan is the priority." "The relay can wait 5 minutes, she countered, rubbing her temples. "We're running on fumes, Owen. Every ounce of resource matters. Carelessness is a luxury we don't have." Her words hit him with disproportionate force. Carelessness, a luxury. The memory of the little boy waiting on the curb, betrayed by a careless promise, surged. He didn't see Eleanor, the tired engineer. He saw the judging adult who saw his fundamental failure. Owen looked at the scattered seeds and then at Lily, whose small hands were nervously trying to sweep up the shards of pottery. He saw the genuine distress of a child who had already lost too much. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, the apology feeling inadequate and hollow. "Sorry doesn't bring back the seeds," Eleanor replied, kneeling to scoop the larger pieces of clay. Her tone was weary, not cruel, but it felt like a final judgment. Owen felt the familiar protective pressure of isolation returning. He didn't belong here. He was a complication, a risk factor. He stood up, towering over the small circle of loss. "I found the relay. I'll fix the fan. But I'll take my meals back in the workshop," he announced, his voice flat. "It's simpler that way." Eleanor didn't look up. "Fine, Owen." The 2 words severed the connection. The engineered safe space fractured instantly. Owen walked away, the bag of tools feeling heavier than the fuel drums. He fixed the fan with detached efficiency, the mechanical whirring unable to drown out the silence he'd just imposed upon himself. The small oat bar Lily had given him was still in his jacket pocket, now feeling like a burden rather than a gift. He was alone again, by choice. But the solitude felt colder than the air outside. The taste of loss was sharper now that he'd briefly tasted belonging. Owen retreated to the workshop. He fixed the fan, ensuring the temperature in the garden stabilized, but he did not return to the main house. He ate cold rations, kept the lights low, and focused entirely on the logistics of sustained isolation. He was back in his comfort zone of self-reliance, yet the silence now felt less like safety and more like punishment. 2 days later, the extreme cold intensified, pushing the mercury even lower. The local sheriff's deputy, who had checked in sporadically, failed to arrive for his scheduled welfare check. Owen monitored the shortwave radio chatter. The news was grim. Road conditions were impassable, and localized resource scarcity was driving desperation. There were reports of small break-ins, focusing on any structure rumored to have generator fuel or food reserves. Owen knew their property was a target. The local neighbors, who had mocked Eleanor's plastic tubs, were starving and freezing, and they knew she had food. He went to the rear of the workshop. Inside a reinforced steel locker, he retrieved equipment he hadn't touched in years. High-grade infrared sensors, quiet perimeter alarms, and 2 heavy-duty motion floodlights. He worked through the night silently. He wasn't setting traps, he was setting defenses. His focus was not on fighting, but on deterring, on protecting the vulnerable resource, the garden and its inhabitants, without them knowing. He mapped the property's blind spots using thermal imaging. He buried the sensor cables deep beneath the icy crust, insulating them meticulously. He secured the ventilation access points with hardened steel mesh. He worked with the controlled intensity of a soldier fortifying a critical outpost. As dawn approached, a sharp metallic ping sounded on his console. A small piece of debris or a desperate animal had triggered a low-level sensor near the perimeter fence. Owen watched the infrared feed. 2 shapes, clearly human, were moving slowly toward Eleanor's back porch, wrapped in heavy, dark clothing. They weren't armed, but they were desperate, moving with the predatory focus of need. Owen didn't call the police. They wouldn't arrive in time. He didn't confront them. He simply walked to a concealed breaker box he had installed hours earlier and flipped a switch. The motion-activated floodlights, rigged directly to his battery bank, flared to life, bathing the entire backyard in blinding white light. The 2 intruders froze, exposed. They looked around wildly, then bolted back into the shadows of the frozen woods. They hadn't seen Owen, they hadn't heard a warning, they just encountered an unexpected, overwhelming defense system that suggested sophisticated and immediate opposition. Owen watched them disappear. He sat back down, letting the adrenaline subside. He was tired, colder than before, but the relief was instantaneous. He had used his most valuable resource, his ability to prepare, to anticipate threat, not for his own benefit, but to maintain the quiet safety of the house he had chosen to step away from. He was protecting the seeds, the warmth, and the fragile peace that Lily and Eleanor had built. The next morning, the floodlights were off. Owen was back in his routine of self-imposed exile, cleaning the carbon buildup from his heater exhaust. He expected the silence to continue, perhaps punctuated by Eleanor's necessary technical requests, but nothing more. Then a soft tap came at the workshop door. It was Lily. She was wrapped in a thick, too-big jacket, holding a small metal bowl wrapped in a towel. "Mr. Owen?" she asked, her voice small. He opened the door just enough for her to slip in. The earthy smell of the main house followed her. "Grandma made stew. She said you need protein because you worked all night," Lily announced, holding out the bowl. It was filled with thick, rich broth, chunks of salvaged chicken and fresh sprouts, the ones Eleanor had managed to save. Owen took the bowl automatically, the warmth radiating through the metal. He didn't ask how Eleanor knew he'd been up all night. She always knew. Lily looked around the workshop, taking in the intricate wiring and the dismantled components. She didn't mention the broken pot or the separation. She simply focused on the present. "The lights were really bright last night," Lily said, looking up at him, her eyes wide and sincere. "Like police lights, but happier." Owen froze. She hadn't been scared. She had felt protected. She saw the blinding intrusion as a signal of safety. They were just security lights, Owen managed, looking down at the bowl. Lily tilted her head slightly. Yeah. Grandma said you fixed the outside quiet too. She says sometimes quiet needs to be guarded. This simple, 8-year-old interpretation cut through all of Owen's self-justifications and defenses. He wasn't guarding resources, he was guarding their peace. Eleanor appeared in the doorway then, her expression tired but neutral. She didn't enter the workshop. She just stood there, letting the cold air wrap around her. "Thank you, Owen," she said, her voice low. No explanation was offered. No drama was created. She knew about the attempted break-in. She knew who had solved it. Owen met her gaze. He didn't apologize again for the seeds. He simply nodded. A tight, affirmative gesture. "I'll check the battery charge on the perimeter sensors before dusk." "Good," Eleanor replied. She then looked at the steaming bowl in his hands. "Finish your stew. We need you working inside now, not just outside." It wasn't a request. It was a quiet, firm demand for his presence. She wasn't forgiving his mistake. She was restoring his place. The gap that had opened between them, the gap of loss and hurt feelings, closed under the necessary weight of their shared reality. Lily took Owen's hand, a small, trusting connection, and led him back toward the house. The temperature outside might be 30 degrees, but they were walking back toward the persistent, earthy heat of the winter garden. 2 weeks later, the deep freeze finally began to break. Temperatures crept into the single digits, and the distant sound of snowplows signaled the slow return of the outside world. But inside Eleanor's house, life had already recalibrated. Owen was no longer living in the workshop. He slept on the sturdy, narrow cot Eleanor had set up in the enclosed sunroom, a space adjacent to the winter garden. It was temporary, functional, and undeniably part of the main structure. The atmosphere was brightened by the soft, diffused light filtering through the plastic sheeting of the garden. The air was heavy with the scent of moist soil and ripening tomatoes, a scent of stubborn life in the face of death. Eleanor was preparing to harvest the first robust batch of kale. She moved among the tiered racks, carefully pruning and talking quietly to Lily, who was busy watering the seedlings with a tiny measuring cup. Owen was nearby, using a small propane torch to gently melt the last stubborn ice around the primary exterior water spigot. He finished the task, his movements deliberate, and came back inside. He didn't ask what was next. He simply looked for the next task. "Owen," Eleanor said, not looking up from her work, "we need to catalogue the remaining fuel, and Lily needs help reaching the top rack of seed packets." Lily immediately looked at him, not with a request, but with an assumption of shared work. Owen nodded, dropping the heavy gloves onto the floor. He walked over and lifted Lily easily onto his broad shoulders. "Higher," she directed, giggling softly as she reached the top shelf, where she began carefully organizing the small paper envelopes, labeling them with a thick crayon. Owen steadied her, his hands holding her ankles firmly. He felt the light, trusting weight of her small body against his neck. The feeling was completely foreign and completely vital. He wasn't just fixing the pipes or defending the perimeter, he was holding up the next generation's supply of seeds. Eleanor watched the simple scene, the big, silent man, the small, focused child, both working in tandem under the soft, false sunlight of the plastic greenhouse. She saw not a tenant and a guest, but the three necessary components of survival: the nurturer, the protector, and the promise. The crisis had stripped away all the usual superficial definitions of connection. Family wasn't bloodline or history. It was the people who chose to protect the quiet, necessary work, who endured the silence, and who made sure the seeds found the soil. Lily finished her task, and Owen lowered her gently to the floor. She gave him a quick, spontaneous hug around his thigh before running back to her grandmother. "We're ready for spring now, Mr. Owen," Lily declared happily, looking at the full rack of future growth. Owen didn't correct her about the Mr. He just watched Eleanor smile. He understood. They hadn't just survived the winter, they had built a home. If this story of silent resilience and found family touched your heart, please hit the like button right now. Let us know in the comments what Eleanor's quiet strength means to you, and subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life emotional narratives that show the power of choosing to protect.